Hello, this is Max the Technomancer, and I'm very sad because I've already recorded this episode. And then I recorded a nice 18 to 20 minute episode, and then I noticed the file was 6 minutes. You can guess where this is going, can't you? A bit worried that it might have somehow not recorded the last 12 plus minutes of the episode. I opened the file, and no, it's recorded all the full episode, but it sped it up 3 or 4 times. So that's not great. The entire 18 to 20 minute video is compressed into 6 minutes. It was all sped up. The sound was sped up as well, so it sounded like chipmunks. So that instead of my voice, it was just sounded like there were chipmunks squeaking into a microphone. Maybe a whole horde of chipmunks. So I thought, hold on, wait, I have video editing software. What if I try slowing down the footage? I tried this. Now I record videos at 30 FPS. This made the video 10 FPS. But okay, that's not too bad. No, what's too bad is the sound. As it would turn out, when you compress a video enough due to it getting glitchily sped up somehow, to be that 2/3 of the sound data is just thrown away, it turns out that is not enough to have actual passable human speech. So when I slowed it back down again, it did not sound like like someone saying words. It didn't sound like a human voice. It certainly didn't sound like my voice, and it was certainly not forming words. It still sounded like chipmunks, but this time it sounded like stoned chipmunks. So yeah. Oh, and in case you're wondering what a stoned chipmunk sounds like, it sounds like what happens when you slow down sped up sound files. So that's a useful description. So now I've got to do that whole video all over again. Terrific. I don't know how that happened, that it got sped up somehow. I've looked through every setting in my recording thing, and I have no idea how that happened. There's not even a setting to speed it up. That's not even a setting that exists, because why would you want that? But it happened anyway. But I'm fairly confident this video is not going to be sped up. Well, actually, no, I'm not, because I was fairly confident that by default that wouldn't happen with the previous one. But here we are. So let's go redo that video then. So I needed bedrock. And past tense, because last video I got the bedrock, but let's pretend I hadn't. So I need, in air quotes, bedrock to do what I want to do this episode. So I already showed how I was getting it with Aqua Regia, where you put a little in a bottle, right click on some bedrock, it drops the item, the bedrock as an item. But it uses the stuff in the bottle, so there is a better way, of course. And remember when I showed philosophen, and you pour it out and it just expands in it spreads out in a big cloud of fire. It sort of destroys everything it touches without dropping the item. There's more to philosophen than that. If you mix it, first of all, if you pour it out with some alchemical salt in the same bottle, as you can see in this bottle, it still does that flaming cloud, but it doesn't destroy blocks at all. It doesn't damage terrain at all. It doesn't even produce fire, like on the ground. So it seems just visual. Now, another thing is, if you mix it with another chemical, like Aqua Regia, then as that cloud spreads out, it will do the effect of that other chemical as it spreads out over everything it touches. So, by combining philosophen, salt, and Aqua Regia, ignore the water. I just happen to have a little water mixed in. It's not important. Just ignore it. It means the philosophen will make it spread out in a cloud. The salt will just prevent it from destroying tons of blocks and not dropping items. And the Aqua Regia means that if it touches bedrock, it will break the bedrock and drop it as an item. So I can do a whole bunch at once. I need to stand back a little because remember, Aqua Regia harms entities quite a lot, so I don't want to get hit by this. But if I just do this... See, it left the stone blocks and such untouched because Aqua Regia doesn't mess with those. But it's dropped all the bedrock as items. So now, just the contents of one little bottle, I've gotten 30 bedrock. It sort of varies based on bedrock structure. And the region backs away, tries to avoid fall. Ah, crap, I right-clicked too low, so it got the floor. My bad. Also, this bottle had more chemical in it than this bottle. I'm now remembering, which is why, why it had a larger range, because there was more philosophy in the bottle. I don't actually need this bedrock, I'll just leave it. So we should use the last one. Let's right-click up 4 blocks. Don't do the floor. Ah, it still does the floor. Darn, it's just such a bigger range. I wasn't expecting it. Well, I've already got several stacks of bedrock in a chest. I don't really need more, and it's very easy to mix up the stuff in these files if I needed more. Okay. Hold on. So if we're going along with the pretense that we're doing last episode all over again, as if last episode didn't happen, which it definitely did. I didn't, like, rewind, turn back the world or anything like that. So this actually isn't still a problem, but we're pretending. I'm all out of copper. I mean, if I look in this chest, we've got 34 copper ingots. Or 29 now, because I used some in the last episode that we lost the footage to, because it got messed up somehow. And that's all the copper we have. So I need more. And honestly, screw mining. I know this is Minecraft. I don't like mining. So, like, that's half the game blocked off to me immediately. Wow. Still good with the crafting, though, so that's something. So, wouldn't it be great if we could produce copper? Well, of course we can. Of course we can. This is alchemy. We can produce base metals. Let's not be ridiculous. Of course it's a thing. Ooh, I added JEI support. More JEI support for info on this. Look. Ooh, special. So we can produce copper with an adamant as a catalyst, which is why I needed the bedrock so I could get some adamant. Just as a catalyst. Mixing quicksilver and sulfur, and there's no real difficulty with temperature bounds. I mean, there are temperature bounds, but it's, like, really easy to hit ones, because room temperature does fine. So it's sort of a proof of concept, even though I've already proven the concept in the episode that got lost. I'm not upset about that at all. What gave you that idea? Hold on, I need some quicksilver. Oh, there's some in here. If I just get some bottle of quicksilver. I just adamant in here, add the quicksilver, and add some sulfur. Just right-click it in. You see it made some copper. And we just get more quicksilver. Now, because I actually needed sulfur for this, when I built this contraption here, it was supposed to make full oxygen and sulfur dioxide. And then I realized, wait, there is one thing we need actual pure sulfur for. Making copper with. Because copper takes pure sulfur. So I changed this from making full oxygen and sulfur dioxide to making full oxygen and making sulfur. Alright. That was a bit of a tangent. So now that's why I've got so much sulfur on hand easily. Let's see, automation in alchemy is very useful, as is knowing what inputs and outputs you're going to need. So if I just pull things out, that's 50 copper nuggets I've just made. So that was pretty cheap, actually. Sulfur I make from gunpowder very easily. It's very cheap. And I mean, it's 3 gunpowder to a sulfur piece, which might not sound cheap, but it is when we can mass produce when we have tons of gunpowder from this mob machine that just uses a rift beam. And rift beam's made of salt and redstone, which we're both producing en masse, so, you know, we have loads of gunpowder when I run this thing. And we don't use much sulfur for copper either. Doesn't take much. And the other ingredient's quicksilver, which is basically just comes from redstone. This is pretty darn cheap. It's a pretty good exchange rate, really. So, and I just did that manually in front of your eyes in seconds. So imagine how fast it could happen if I automated it or even semi-automated it to really make copper for me. And of course, you know me, I'm going to at the very least semi-automate it. Like this is semi-automated. I put in gunpowder and it makes the full oxygen and sulfur for me. And for what I'm doing, that's fine, because I'm not using stacks upon stacks upon stacks of sulfur. I'm using some sulfur. Right, enough that I want some sort of helpful machine to help me make it, but not enough that I really feel the need to have like hoppers with gunpowder being piped into this thing and everything else. I mean, feel free to do that if you want. I mean, maybe you want to have like chests and chests automatically filled with copper ingots or copper blocks or something. Although I've not added auto crafting yet, have I? So they just autofill with copper nuggets. I suppose you could add a mod that had auto crafting. Then you're gonna need to fully automate sulfur, in which case feel free. But yeah, I don't need it right now. Alright. Woo, jump cut. There we are. Sorry. That was a bit of a, I guess, a bit of a joke. I mean, I did a jump cut while jumping. I guess if I really wanted to make you all groan, I could have waved around a pair of shears for the cutting as well. I definitely didn't just do a cut so I could get a drink of water because I've been talking continuously for 10 minutes after having done it for 20 minutes when the old video got taken over by the stoned chipmunks. I'm still annoyed. Of course I'm still annoyed because it's annoying, though very funny. Right. So I guess the end bit of the video is supposed to be where I talk about something I changed. So last episode, and by last episode I don't mean the one that's ruled by the stoned chipmunks. I mean the last episode that you people saw. I mentioned that really most of the stuff in alchemy comes after the practitioner stone. But I've thought about that, and I realized that is terrible game design. Because really, there should be a decent amount of content between the philosophers and practitioners, so after you get the philosophers but before practitioners. And when I made that video, all that was in between was like the gravity plates. Sorry, they're density plates, but they're basically gravity plates, and the flying machine. So I moved a few things from the practitioners to the philosophers. For example, transmuting base metals, you know, like what I just did. Used to be the catalyst was a practitioner stone, now it's a bit of adamant, which you can make with the philosophers. Because, you know, the alchemists weren't going on about making a practitioner stone to turn base metals into gold, they were going about philosophers. They didn't even have a concept of a practitioner stone. I invented that when I added alchemy. It's like, you know what? I want a tier 2 philosopher stone that does the opposite and makes things merge together. Practitioner stone. That was my thought process. Although, rather longer than that. More stages in between of rational thought. Mainly. The other thing I moved was, well, this device here, the atmospheric energizer, which is a bit of a fun device, really. So this thing, if I place it down, before I really start talking about this, I should talk about the inspiration for the electricity in Crossroads. So I finally, as you all know, I finally added some forge energy support in the form of like the dynamo and the Tesla coils and the charging stand and whatever else. And the stuff that in alchemy needs forge energy. Now, before alchemy, I was adamantly opposed to adding forge energy to Crossroads, mainly because I could not think of a good exchange rate. People kept asking me, make a thing to produce rotary energy with electricity and vice versa. That's the voice of all people who make suggestions, by the way. And I was very much opposed, because in Crossroads, rotary energy is very cheap. Because the balance with rotary isn't producing it, it's controlling it. It's really quite easy to produce. It's very much more difficult to control things like speeds and angles. So it doesn't really make, it's hard to pick an exchange rate, right? If it's a little bit of rotary energy to a lot of forge energy, it's very OP, and you could just like power everything off of one like steam boiler. On the other hand, if I made it a lot of rotary energy to a little bit of forge energy, then there's no point making a steam boiler to make forge energy. Like, the converter is useless because it's such a bad exchange rate. And it's like, there's no middle ground here. The middle ground is also on the end of this machine is basically pointless to use. So I finally came up with a reasonable exchange rate. And that with the dynamo, which is, first of all, configurable. You can set the exchange rate or just flat out disable this thing. Second of all, it's a really crappy exchange rate, but it's still worth using because there are things in Crossroads which now use forge energy, and they use very little. So you can power them quite easily with a dynamo. However, if you wanted to power your base in like with applied energistics or whatever off a dynamo, tough luck. So, you know, I finally added Forge Energy, and besides, I want to add stuff that really required electricity. No point adding another electricity system, and I love lightning. So as I've sort of gotten off on a tangent, why did I add all this electricity stuff? Well, alchemy is really inspired by pseudoscience and protoscience. And there used to be, back in the days of things like pseudoscience and protoscience and alchemists and whatnot, there were people who thought they understood how the universe worked. You know, they had their own versions of the laws of physics and whatnot, and they thought they were correct, and they were logical rules, and they were self-consistent in many cases. In many cases, they were not, but in many cases, they were. However, as they later, as has been discussed, is well fairly well understood, it's possible to have a set of logical, self-consistent rules and for them to be completely wrong. 100% wrong. As it would turn out, the self-consistent and logical rules of the alchemists were 100% wrong. But Crossroads is about, well, what if they weren't? What if these fairly self-consistent rules were right? What if they were right? What if they worked? Well, then elemental fire and basically everything in front of me. That's what would happen, and that's a pretty interesting idea. And as I started doing a bit of research into this, you know, in preparation for adding alchemy, one name kept popping up, and after the first one or two times of seeing this name pop up, I really thought, this isn't actually a bad name to add. It's Nikolai Tesla. See, at first I rejected adding anything related to Tesla because, like, alchemy was like medieval times, and Tesla was like not, very much not. But when you think about it, he does fit the theme. Not the time period, but the theme. In that, well, Nikolai Tesla, and I'm sure his ardent fans are going to be angry at me now. Nikolai Tesla, Edison's rival, and in my opinion, much better than Edison. I've now appeased his fans. Nikolai Tesla lived in a time where they didn't really understand electricity. They were quite good with direct current electricity. And that was Edison's specialty, was direct current. However, they were only really just starting to investigate alternating current, which was Tesla's specialty. And alternating current, despite on seeming quite a bit like direct current, alternating current being what comes out of a generator, direct current comes out of a battery, alternating current, that's an oversimplification, but is very different from direct current. And people can read up as much as they want on the war of currents and all these other things, but what it boils down to is alternating current has some really weird properties, and you can do a lot of weird things with it. And in the time of Tesla, Tesla was trying to understand the rules that govern alternating current, and he basically failed. I mean, he made discoveries that has certainly progressed the study of alternating current, and he made significant contributions to the field, and he had good inventions related to alternating current that worked. However, their understanding of alternating current, which we now know to be mostly wrong, allowed for a few things that are definitely impossible. The most famous one, I would say, would be Tesla's dream of wireless free electricity. Tesla wanted it to be that electricity would be available to everyone and free. And to get it, you just put up like an antenna, and you'd get electricity out of the antenna, and you wouldn't have to pay for it, or anything. And under their understanding of alternating current, they thought if you got the frequency right, and you got a few other things right, you'd be able to basically transmit electricity like Wi-Fi. You would be able to transmit electricity, and people with antennas could pick it up, but they hadn't gotten it working. And we now know why they haven't gotten it working, because it's freaking impossible. But their understanding at the time said it was possible. It isn't, though. As it would turn out, there's way too much energy loss for it to be at all practical, but they didn't know this. So Tesla spent a significant portion of his life trying to invent a wireless alternating current transmitter. Never worked, because it's impossible, but he did try. He had two main schemes for it as well. One was my favorite, which was electrify the entire upper atmosphere. His other scheme, you know, his backup, very sane scheme, what, of course, was to electrify the entire Earth. This sounds incredibly dangerous, and if it had worked, it probably would have been. So that anyone could, like, stick a metal rod into the ground and get electricity out. This doesn't sound safe, does it? So, of course, I had to add Tesla coils because under Tesla's understanding, Tesla coils, if you did it right, would be a very efficient way to transmit electricity. They're not. Turns out he was wrong. So, Tesla coils, Tesla, his invention, obviously. But I added this atmospheric energizer, which literally lets you electrify the upper atmosphere to provide free electricity to the world. You can't electrify the Earth, sadly. I've not added that. We don't need both. So, the way this thing works is you put forge energy in, and it basically uses that forge energy to put it into the atmosphere, which basically means goes into this shared, huge buffer that's shared between players, between dimensions, and anyone can add to or draw from it for free. Well, I say for free. To put in, you need to spend the forge energy that you put in. Obviously. So it's like a great big shared forge energy battery that's wireless. Now, of course, I'm a terrible person, and I had to add some sort of negative repercussion in an environmental sense. Because if you think about in real life, we now live in a world where we understand if you do anything large scale and industrial scale, you are going to break the environment somehow. Global warming, other forms of climate change, ozone layer being destroyed, various species going extinct, so on, so on. You break the environment anytime you do anything on an industrial scale, pretty much. So, of course, how could electrifying the entire upper atmosphere not break the environment? I ask you. So I added a way to break the environment. If the charge in the atmosphere gets above 50%, there will be some negative effects. As the charge gets higher, they get worse. They only start after 50%. You'll start getting lightning strikes. Even not during a storm, even if it's not raining. It'll just be lightninging, even during otherwise clear weather. Won't rain, just lightning. I mean, you can still have rain, but it doesn't have to be raining for there to be lightning. And as the charge level goes up in the atmosphere, it lightnings more and more and more. Until it's constantly thundering harder than a normal thunderstorm. And also, once you get above, I think it's 90%, it might be 80%, don't quote me on those numbers, charge, you get the other negative effect. Creepers spawn charged. Like, all creepers will spawn as charged creepers. I'm a terrible person, and I'm proud. So, that's the thing. And if you want to reverse these effects, simply drain the atmosphere down below 50%, and they'll all go away, no problem. It's very reversible, unlike global warming. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty easy to regulate that. It's literally just hook a comparator up to this thing and it tells you the charge level of the atmosphere and turn off whatever's putting in once you hit about 50%. You'll be fine. You'll be perfectly fine. So why did I add it? 1, for lulz. 2, I think it'll lead to an interesting dynamic on servers where you'll have, like, players will band together into environmental protection agencies to block players from overcharging the atmosphere. This is my thinking. This is what I think will happen. This is what I hope will happen anyway. Or maybe people will just be like, screw it, eternal lightning storms, charge creepers, this is fine. By the way, from testing, once you hit 100% charge level, it's just the storms get really crazy, and those skeletal horses that spawn from lightning very rarely will be all over the place because it's lightninging so much, thundering so much. So yeah, it doesn't sound so severe, but it really can get quite severe. So what did I change? Well, you see there's this Voltus thing, and that's an element that I added. And to produce it, you need the Practitioner's Stone, this stuff. But I moved it, I changed it. It used to be to insert any forge energy at all, you needed Voltus. And it just consumed it. It doesn't take Voltus to craft this thing, but you need it to use it. I've changed that. It's no longer requires Voltus. It can use Voltus. It can do things with Voltus, but it no longer requires it. Now, if you put forge energy in, it'll just send it into the atmosphere, no problem. But it still has a Voltus inventory. And that's because if you put Voltus in now, what it does is it will add forge energy to the atmosphere without actually requiring forge energy. It'll turn Voltus into forge energy, because Voltus is like the charge element in alchemical form. So it sort of makes sense, you know, charge element to electricity. Makes sense to me. It's a very good exchange rate. It's something like 1 Voltus to 10,000 forge energy or something like that. But yeah, so yeah, that's a pretty good way to charge up the atmosphere real quick. I could show this thing in action as well. It's got a bit of a cool particle effect. Now I'm going to use it, power it with a hand crank, which isn't going to do much because, you know, this thing is designed for like thousands of forge energy, not like 100, not the amount of a dynamo, but not the amount of a hand crank dynamo, but still we're producing a bit, and there's like lightning going up. Right, there we are. See? Maybe you weren't looking here. You should be looking between the prongs on this thing, just in case. Right, there's lightning going up. And currently just sending it all up. It takes something like 1,000 forge energy for it to send up a pulse. If I wrench this, it'll go, instead of being in charging the atmosphere mode, it'll go into draining mode. It'll flip to orange, and it'll drain out. You'll see like backwards lightning sparks as it drains it to fill adjacent machines. So it's just filled this thing with electricity that we don't really need right now. So yeah. So yeah, I thought I'd move some things from being no longer requiring the practitioner's stone, like move them to be a bit earlier. I don't know. These are some of my ideas. All over the place, you know, I'm tweaking progression paths, trying to make things easier to use, better, and so on. For example, one thing I haven't mentioned, just to wrap up the video, I changed solvents. Remember before, like, all these different recipes had some solvent requirement? Oh, you need a polar solvent. Oh, you need aqua regia as a solvent. Yada, 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 yada. I removed that completely. There's no concept of solvents anymore. I've deleted all the code related to solvents. There is no more solvents requirement for recipes. Mind you, things that needed aqua regia to be present before as a solvent to craft before still needs aqua regia present. However, now it's marked as a catalyst instead of a solvent. So I've simplified things. I've removed the whole solvent system. Because, you know, basically a needless bit of extra complication. Well, I'll wrap up this video here. Hopefully this video won't get chipmunked. Here's to hoping.